everyone. All right, we'll just give it a second here as folks funnel on in. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel with the Progressive Change Campaign Committee. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. I think you all know me by now, but it's a treat to see you all here every week. So we have folks that have been on almost every single one of these calls, or at least 3 of them. We have our friend Norbert Hornstein and Morris Pearl, head of the Patriotic Millionaires, and Monina Von Opel and Ed Miller and Mary Geisman and Doug Krieger, Kim Miller and Richard Master with the Patriotic Millionaires, and Steve Gensler and Robert Frame and Alan Bradley and Steve Walker and so many other friends. And then we have folks here joining us for the first time as well. So regardless.
Whoop.
Oops. Oh, we lost your audio.
Well, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for joining everybody to our call, joining our call tonight, and a special welcome to folks who have not joined our Meet the Candidates call before. We're glad that you're here and checking things out. It should be a great conversation tonight. Tonight we are speaking with Candace Valenzuela, one of the candidates. I'm so excited about this cycle. She is running for Congress in Texas 24. It is an open swing congressional district. Currently, the seat is held by Republican incumbent Kenny Marchant, who is retiring. So this is one of our best pickup opportunities this cycle, one of the best chances we have to flip the district. And Candace is also a very special candidate. She grew up in a military family that struggled financially. They were homeless for a time. She overcame the odds to get a scholarship to college and eventually became an educator. She became the first Latina and first African-American woman elected to her local school board. She is an awesome working mama. We were just bonding over working with 2 young kids through this pandemic and how hard that is also to be running for Congress as you do that. I'm also proud to report that Candace is an alumni of our training program, and she is endorsed by another hardworking mama, Elizabeth Warren. Candace is in a July 14th primary runoff, and she's running for the Democratic nomination against someone named Kim Olson. Kim Olson is a retired Air Force colonel who actually was charged with war profiteering. While she was one of the most senior military figures in Iraq, she was also on payroll of a security firm and helping direct millions of dollars in contracts to that security firm. So there's quite a stark contrast between these 2 candidates. And this district is very winnable, as I said. Beto O'Rourke actually won this district by 3 points in 2018 when he ran against Ted Cruz for Senate. But it makes a real difference who the candidate is the Democrats are getting behind. You know, is it going to be a war profiteer, or is it going to be someone like Candace who really has this incredible understanding and conviction and experience of what working families face every day in this country and what they go through? And that's why we are so proud to endorse Candace Valenzuela for this seat, and are so excited for you to get to talk to her today. So with that, let me turn things over to Candace. Oops, Candace, are you talking? I don't think we can hear you. I think you're on mute. I think she's talking, but I think she's on mute right now.
Can somebody unmute me? Oh, there we
go.
go. Thank you so much. I didn't know how to communicate that I couldn't unmute without unmuting myself. It was quite the conundrum there. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for spending this part of your evening with me. My name is Candace Valenzuela, and I am running for Congress in Texas's 24th district. And when I win, I'll be the first Black Latina ever elected to United States Congress. And I'm so proud to be endorsed by the PCCC. You all had an amazing training. And I don't think, I was already an elected official when I took your training, and I don't think I would have considered running for Congress had it not been for that training. I think when I went through it and I was hearing about the way that you can campaign, for the first time I realized that I could run for Congress as myself, which it was just startling, to be compassionate, to care about investing in people, to know that I could be fearless in that. And your training, aside from being very, very technically excellent, was inspiring. So thank you so much for what you're doing in getting progressives in all levels of office. And I know that we are in very troubling times. And it's pretty obvious that there is a gigantic disconnect between most of those in power and those, as my friend Ayanna Pressley would say, closest to the pain. We're living in fear. I know I am. I've been living with that fear every day for longer than I can remember. I feel like that recently it's amped up quite a bit. But being a Black woman who dealt with racism growing up in Texas, being the mother of two young sons. And when I was pregnant with my first son, Cleto, I saw Tamir Rice die in front of his older sister in the street while he was playing in the park. This is something I carry around with me all of the time. But even knowing that, I know we can't let fear win. We have to continue to stand up. We need to speak out, and we need to do our best to create change. The COVID-19 pandemic and our government's response has only highlighted the already existing man-made inequity that exists in our country due to the legacy of policymakers who don't understand the issues facing working families, that don't understand the lived experience of many Americans who might have dotted their I's, they crossed their T's. Maybe they got a full ride to the college of their dreams and then graduated and ended up living out of their car for a couple of months and living off of granola bars. The American dream is out of reach for people who are working hard and doing everything that they're supposed to do. And our country right now, especially knows that when it comes to Black people, Black women, Black men that have died recently, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. In my area, we still talk about Tatiana Jefferson, who was playing video games with her nephew. She was babysitting him. She was a caretaker for her mother, and she died in her home. And now her mother died because she was her primary caretaker, and her father died of natural causes, but the unnatural amount of stress put on him is not something that could have left him. And that's what I'm talking about here. You're not just killing an individual, you're killing entire communities, and have been for hundreds of years at this point. And it's time that we stop this. Black Americans make up 13% of the population in the United States, but we comprise 24% of the victims of police brutality. We are dying at a rapid clip here in Texas. Our Black maternal mortality is twice the rate of anyone else's, and that's controlling for income. Black Americans are dying at twice the rate of white Americans during COVID-19. We're aware of this now. There's a point at which the public has become turned to these issues in a way that I've never seen before. And so my work, my hope is that these events are not going to be in vain, that they're going to strengthen the resolve in the fight for equity. And the only way we're going to see real progress on these issues is if we elect leaders who understand them, who understand being a part of a working family, not making ends meet, being a woman of color, being worried about my brother's very first year at law school, not because I was worried that he wouldn't get work done, but because he was going to Baylor in Waco, Texas. And if you know anything about Waco, you understand why I'd be afraid of a Black man in Waco, Texas. Thinking about what it would be like to send my child, my 4-year-old, or my 1-year-old later on to school, and hoping that he's going to be able to make it back home for any number of reasons. I feel a responsibility for my family and for families across this country, and that is why I ran for school board. And that's why I became the first Black woman and the first Latina woman ever to serve in Carrollton Farmers Branch, because I'm not afraid of breaking barriers. I'm not afraid of trying to go up against seemingly insurmountable odds, because my survival, my family's survival, our country's survival depends on it. Fixing what's wrong in Washington is hard, but we have a lot of hard things in our life right now, and doing nothing is probably the hardest thing I could conceive of right now. I'm running for Congress because the opportunities that helped me go from being homeless as a kid, living in a kiddie pool outside of a gas station, to the first in my family to go to college, to the first woman of color on my school board, have been under attack. But these attacks didn't just start in 2016, right? And we need people who understand what it's like, again, to have to deal with the urgencies of these issues. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you about what we're doing here. I got out of a March 3rd primary. It was a 7-way race, and now I am going on head-to-head with Colonel Olson, as Stephanie had mentioned earlier. Texas 24 is a suburban majority minority district made up of families that look a lot like mine, and we will vote for a Democrat, but we won't vote for just any Democrat. Last cycle, the candidate running as a Democrat got within 3 points, but Beto O'Rourke, running for Senate, won this district. And when he was walking around this district, he was talking about healthcare issues. He was talking about the issues that affected working families. And that's why he won a good portion of the Latino vote. And that was the difference between him and that other candidate. So we know a Democrat can win here, and it can't be just anyone. It's going to be this one, and that is why I'm working so hard with my coalition, with the PCCC, with AFL-CIO, with Elizabeth Warren, with Ayanna Pressley, with Secretary Castro, with many incredible folks, Deb Holland. It just makes my heart soar to know that these folks want me in this fight with them, because they're my biggest heroes. So thanks so much, and I'd love to address your questions now.
Thank you so much. Can folks hear me? I know you lost me there. Okay, perfect. So we have our first question. Thank you so much, Candace. We have great questions rolling in. Our first question is to our friend Morris Pearl. Morris, what's your question for Candace?
Hi, Candace. So most of the candidates we talk to, or who are running anyway, whether we talk to them or not, are people that are independently wealthy and have lots of money and don't need to work for a living. Can you mention what it's like being like a regular person having to take off months to run for office?
I feel very, 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 very lucky that during a global pandemic, I have the ability right now to be in my home, not worried about whether or not I'm going to be able to eat, not worried about whether I'm going to be able to make rent. That was definitely not the case for much of my life, and for much of my adult life. I was working 3 jobs, and now we're in a place where I've been able to. We'd saved up for a congressional run. So our financial situation would not have necessarily been much different. Actually, I wasn't saving up for a congressional run. I was saving up for the maternity leave I was supposed to have when I started running. When I started running, I had a 2-week-old, and it wasn't in the cards for me to have a baby and then get into a congressional campaign. But because of the urgencies I was telling you about earlier, I felt like it was important that we get the right kind of person in here to ensure that this seat flips. And not being fabulously wealthy, getting into this process hasn't been easy. I think people think a lot about the individual trappings of somebody who's got lots and lots of money, that they can maybe fund their own races, but folks with lots of money aren't, in the political sphere, the most powerful thing that you have is your network. And my network is of working folks, of folks who are trying to make ends meet. You know, both of my parents were in the United States military. They were enlisted, they were not officers, they did not become fabulously rich. Many of their friends were in the same position. And so starting off this process and getting myself off the ground, I had to put in a lot more hours than people expected in order to get half as far. And I know that that's, it seems like a tried and true saying that you have to work twice as hard to go half as far for African Americans, but in fundraising, in political fundraising especially, that is very strongly the case. But we're working our way out of it. And that's all I know how to do. And we're gaining a lot of traction, both for this campaign in general and in fundraising. And I'm really proud of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Morris. Thank you, Candace. Up next, we have a question from our friend Norbert Hornstein. Norbert, what's your question for Candace, sir?
Yeah, hi. So I'm just sort of curious, in what way do you differ from your primary candidate? I'm sure I know how you differ from your Republican candidate, because Republicans are all horrible. But in what way do you differ from your Democratic candidate, and why do you think that you're better placed to win in the district?
Well, for one, I live in this district. I am the only one in this race right now that has served in this district. I was elected here by a fifth of it. I defeated an 18-year incumbent with the backing of the Republican establishment in order to take my seat here. My opponent, after seeing that this seat almost flipped in 2018, filed to run here. A couple of months after filing to run here, she got her first apartment in the district and has been working very hard to catch up. She's doing a lot of performative volunteer work in order to catch up with the volunteer work I've been doing all along. She's trying to catch up in terms of local endorsements, but I've led in local endorsements from the grassroots, from local activists, from local elected officials. And I'm very proud to say in all parts of the Democratic spectrum, they know who I am and what I stand for. And they've been willing to get behind me in this race. And that's part of the reason that I've been able to get such big national and statewide and national endorsements, like the Texas Latina list, like the Texas AFL-CIO, like all three affinity caucuses. The Congressional Black, Hispanic, and Asian and Pacific Islander caucuses have endorsed me. I'm the only tri-caucus endorsed candidate. And aside from the breadth of endorsements, aside from the fact that I've been elected here, at the end of this, there's no leaving. There's no, I'm not going to stop pushing for equity. I'm not going to stop pushing for my community because I live here, I love here, and this is where I'm raising my family.
So does that mean that there are no policy differences between you and your opponent?
Oh God. So she wants Medicare for all over the age of 55. She starts off her energy policy by wanting to have oil companies at the table. She doesn't really want to decrease military spending. These are things that are not on our website because she's tried to be as vague as possible. These are things that I've had to glean from candidate forums. But she's placed herself as a moderate candidate. And before I even had a chance to get my website off, she's been using lots of interesting dog whistles to describe me. I'm too left for the district, despite the fact that I've been elected here. I couldn't possibly be running for office with my baby. I don't have the experience necessary, even though my lived experience is serving, governing here. These are very important differences between me and my opponent. And we're working hard to communicate that to the voters right now.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. Up next, we have Jose Cruz has a question on healthcare. Jose, sir, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, please. And Jose, what's your question for Candace?
Hi, Candace. I actually found out about.
Jose, I think your sound went out.
Jose? Okay, I think we lost Jose.
No.
So, Candace, I will ask Jose's question. He asked, do you support Medicare for all, and how do we ensure all Americans get access to available, affordable, basic health care?
Well, Jose, I hope that you can hear me. I'm sorry I can't hear you, but I want to say that I believe that healthcare is a human right, and investing in healthcare for all Americans is not only the morally right thing to do, it's going to save taxpayers more money, it's going to make workers more productive, and it's going to be great in preventing wide-scale issues like those that accompany a global pandemic, making sure people have the healthcare that they need in order to head off symptoms at the pass and not worry about whether they have thousands and thousands of dollars to cover some of those out-of-pocket costs that go with going into an ER. I'm advocating for a robust public option that's actually modeled after the one that Senator Elizabeth Warren put forward. Under my plan, those making under $50K a year will get 100% of their costs paid, while those making over $50K a year will get 90% paid. An expansion of the current Medicare system allows the government to negotiate prescription drug prices. And like Senator Warren, I think this puts our country on a path to the universal healthcare system. We need to take on the prescription drug industry now. We need to take on the insurance industry now. And everything that undergirds the things that I'm working for, whether it be expanding healthcare and making sure that everyone's covered, or making sure that we have full day universal pre-K, or making sure that we have bold action on climate change, all of these things are undergirded by strong campaign finance reform. And that's one of my highest priorities. And I know that that's just I know that you asked me about healthcare, but it's something that I'm passionate about, because when we don't have the reforms that we need in our campaign finance, people die. And that's just the way that it is.
Thank you, folks. So bear with us. It seems like we're having some kinks, some technical difficulties here, but bear with us. I think we can all see and hear each other now, knock on wood. So up next, we have Jennifer White. Jennifer White has a question for you. Jennifer, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to unmute yourself. And what's your question for Candace, Jennifer?
I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay. You had sent me in a question. Okay. All right. I can ask it.
I'm not. I
okay.
didn't.
Oh, okay. Never mind then. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Up next, we have Mr. Scott Walker. Scott, what is your question, sir, for Candace?
Hi, Candace. You know, when you win this district, you're going to have a target on your back for the next 2 years for your reelection. How does that fact affect your ability to take leadership on these issues that you're espousing?
If you're talking about the issues that I've talked about today, these are issues I've been out and open about in general, and I don't think that investing in people is ever a losing strategy. But in general, I walk around with the target on my back all the time. Anyway, I know that's sounds simplistic, but I've survived a lot, and I know that I'm by far not the worst off in this country. But there's nothing worse to me. I can survive being a political target. I cannot survive seeing the country in the state that it's in, and I'm ready and willing to do the work that it takes to invest in our families.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay, up next we have Letty Trejo. Letty, what's your question? I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute yourself, Letty. What's your question for Candace?
My question is in reference to our education system, and what are we doing, or what is your plan for safe schools? I know that as an educator, we have been going through a lot of threat assessments and, trainings for us to, keep our schools safe, but what are we doing to control for gun control in our country, in our state?
Letty, thank you so much for asking that question. And that's it's part of the reason that I'm running for Congress, is that some of those issues that I was grappling with at the school board level needed a whole systemic change approach to it. So let me start with the easy parts. When I was on the school board, I made sure that we invested in better physical infrastructure for our schools. So before we were talking about putting in armed police officers or anything like that, we were talking about simple things like secure vestibules, making sure that schools have the updated infrastructure so that teachers can get it in and out safely without having to prop up the door and leave these areas insecure. But there are lots of other ways that we can make our schools safer, making sure that, again, everybody has access to healthcare, and that includes mental health care. Making sure that parents and families have access to a living wage. Just making sure that we have these families more present. I don't blame families for school shootings, let me be clear, but it is a lot harder to be more emotionally present for your kids if you have to work extra jobs in order to make ends meet. And so making sure that that compassion and that love is present because people are able to make ends meet. Making sure that we have access to universal full-day pre-K and early childhood childcare. And you think, well, why does it have anything to do with school security? So many problems, whether they be in learning disabilities, I apologize, learning disabilities, or problems that happen to come with emotional difficulties. If they're caught early enough, if they're in a high quality educational setting, will make it a lot easier for kids to fare in school for years after. So making sure that we have equitable education and that access is there is going to make a huge difference. But outside of that, the harder parts, making sure that we have universal background checks, making sure we close the boyfriend loophole, making sure we close the gun hole loophole. I am the daughter of two United States Army veterans. I also consider myself a survivor. My best friend in high school was killed by her husband, her father. He was a veteran. He had pretty severe PTSD. He had a couple of cases against him. They knew him to be abusive. He shouldn't have had access to a firearm, but he did. And he killed my friend, and he killed her mother. And then after a standoff with the police, he killed himself. And no kid should ever have to live in fear the way that my friend did. No community should ever have to be rocked like the communities in Santa Fe. No one should ever have to have their childhood hurt that way. And so I'm going to be working hard to make sure that our schools are safer, are more equitable, so that our kids can thrive.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Candace, we have a question coming in from our Facebook Live. Marie Miner would like to know, how would you as a congresswoman deal with police brutality and protest demonstrations that include violent agitators?
Okay, so those are separate. In terms of police brutality, I think that we need to dispense with qualified immunity. We need to make sure that we up our accountability. So making sure that our police officers are accountable, that we have external oversight. Last night I don't know if I'll say the pleasure. I got to talk to Pastor Tarver. Pastor Tarver's son was a criminal justice major at University of North Texas. He was actively seeking a job with the police force. He also happened to be a young African-American man, and he got into a car accident. And after he was let out of the trauma unit 2 days too early, he developed a brain bleed. And before he knew it, he was in front of four police officers with a meat cleaver and a frying pan in one hand, screaming out scripture. And this kid was 150 pounds. He wasn't very big, they tased him, and then they said he didn't comply, but then they shot him 3 times. Now Pastor Tarver, who, you know, he's a minister for another police department himself, who was very proud of his son, who was on the dean's list, who was working 2 jobs, is without his son. It's a nightmare I think about all of the time, and quite frankly, personally, as a Black parent. And what he talked about, and what I fully believe is true, is that we need to have, again, we need to dispense with qualified immunity. We need to have external oversight so that the very people that police officers need to work with every day in order to deal with crime in their cities aren't the same people who also have to adjudicate cases for police. So we need better external oversight. And we need to make sure that we implement policies that emphasize de-escalation, that emphasize that the people within a community aren't the enemy, but they're fellow members of the community. And that also means encouraging police departments to hire from within the community as well. There are so many things that we need to do in order to better handle that. Now, in terms of protesters and looters, I think that those are separate issues. I think that people should be allowed to exercise their freedom of speech, and protesting in the streets is one of the ways in which they should be doing that. It's very American. We should do what we can to protect our businesses, but not at the expense of human life. I just don't believe that we should be killing people over this. And we are in a very precarious place as a country. But if we implement those de-escalation techniques, we'll be able to focus on those folks who may not necessarily be there for the most savory reasons.
Thank you, Candace, and thank you for the question. Candace, I have another question. Someone just chatted me from Thomas. How will we stop Republicans from disenfranchising thousands of minority voters?
We need to make sure that we vote in the types of numbers that will overwhelm the system. And I know that sounds simplistic, but I'm doing what I can to organize people here to make sure that they know how to vote, to make sure that they know where to vote. We definitely have voter disenfranchisement for people of color here in Texas. It's not as severe as it has been in, say, Georgia or Florida, but we have issues here. And if we organize around it, if we work hard, we should be able to get enough people in there so that we can win the presidency, make sure that we have better folks on the Supreme Court, make sure that we have better oversight in terms of our elections too. We need to overhaul our system of elections. It hasn't been looked at seriously in quite some time. There is a lot of sloppiness. We need more uniform systems as well, so that we can better secure our elections. And we haven't taken a serious look at that in a long time. So that's one of the things I'm going to be pushing for as well.
Thank you. Up next, folks, keep the questions rolling in. Some of you are just G-chatting me, which works too, but we'd love to see your bright faces if you feel comfortable as well. So up next, from Ruth, Candace, she says, I don't live in Texas. What are the key issues for your district?
Couple of key issues. Well, they've shifted a little bit. I mean, we're worried about the right to choose. That's one big thing that we're concerned about, because even during a global pandemic, our governor decided to say that abortion was an elective procedure and that we would not be able to get access. And luckily, we had a court strike that down. But they've done their best in order to make sure that women have restricted access to healthcare. Making sure that we all have access to healthcare is another thing that Texans are very, very concerned about. And making sure that when our kids go to school, our kids come home intact and safe. So we're definitely very worried about gun violence in schools, which is not something you would expect from Texas. But the vast majority of Texans, just like the vast majority of Americans, are pro-responsible gun users, pro-responsible gun owners. And the way that our system is set up, we are making a lot of people, we're putting a lot of people at risk, including our kids.
Thank you. Thank you, Candace. Up next, we have Carlia Hughes. Candace, Carlia wants to know, Peter Seward is up next. He wants to know, how do you propose we get money out of politics?
So I'm a big proponent of publicly funded elections. I mean, there's no way to get money entirely out of politics. Now, I hope you just mean the bad kind of money, because in terms of what you have to do as an elected official, which is communicate with constituents, which is apprise people of the issues. Unfortunately, that isn't free, but making sure that the origin of that money is from the people in that district or in the people of that area would be ideal. It's not what we have now, but it would be ideal. And if we go with the publicly funded election proposals that I've seen go forward, I think it's for every $1 that goes in, another $4 is added to the campaign finance. I think it's going to make a lot of people not just in greater control of the process, but they're going to feel invested because they're going to be able to give to the candidate in their community, and they're going to be able to feel as though they have some control over the process. Because right now, a lot of people are disenfranchised. They feel separated entirely from it. So I'm going to be pushing for that reform as soon as I get into office.
Thank you. Great. Up next, we have our friend Steve Gensler. Steve, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute yourself, sir. And Steve, what's your question for Candace?
Hi, Candace. I wonder, who is your Republican opponent, and how well is he financed, and how are you comparing, how are the polls compare you?
My Republican opponent is Beth Van Duyne. Her claim to fame was being the very first mayor in the country to endorse Donald Trump. And she also, in that very same year, put a young man in police custody for bringing a clock he built to school while Muslim. When the sheriff came out and said that he released the boy because he didn't believe in keeping a 14-year-old boy in police custody for bringing a clock he built to school, she threatened to defund the police in Irving. This is probably the last time you've heard of a Republican doing this, but this is the kind of person that Beth Van Duyne is. She doesn't reflect the values of this district. She doesn't reflect the values of Texas. And, you know, a lot of folks that know me as being a progressive candidate, they've known me as being a progressive elected official. I don't have to change my values for them in order for them to vote for me, because they know that I'm honest. They know that they can trust me. And there are a lot of pet issues that people have, but sometimes when you're looking for a way out of corruption, you're going to be able to make a couple of compromises. And that's the sense that I'm getting from a lot of Republicans that I've talked to. They don't agree with everything, but they trust me. And I'm honored to have that trust. And I'm honored to have the trust of many folks. And my Republican opponent, we don't really have any out polls yet. Nobody is releasing them out to the public. But as far as I know, this district is leaning Democrat. Cook Report rated this as a toss-up. Sabado's Crystal Ball rated this as a toss-up. Rachel Bidicoffer, I think, said lean D.
Thank you. Thank you, Candace. So folks, thank you so much. Please forgive me if I didn't get your question. I promise that I will send you my email. We'll stick that in the chat box, and I will connect you to the best person from Candace's team. If you want to volunteer, if you want to dig in deeper on whatever issue, we will do that. So let's go ahead and move toward wrapping up. Let me kick it back over to Stephanie to share a few final thoughts with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for your great questions. And thank you, Candace, for answering them and for being so raw and powerful and personal and honest in your answers. I want to talk again about this Ayanna Pressley quote that Candace brought up at the beginning of this call, which was the people closest to the pain should be the people in power. This is exactly why races like this one matter so much. As always, if you feel moved to chip in, please do. Every dollar counts, especially in this pandemic election cycle. But let's please elect the incredible Candace Valenzuela. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you. All right, Rachel, are we wrapping up?
Oh, yes. Candace, is there one more?
Oh, we can't hear you. I think we lost Rachel again, but thank you so much, Candace, and thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week for the next call with Meet the Candidates. Thank you so much. Bye, Candace. Thank you.
Thank you.